Alright, Game Bears, it is time for another edition of Unused Content in Games, and once again we are continuing with Mega Man X4, and this time the unused content of the May 8th, 1997 prototype build for the PlayStation or PS1 build, released on a special trial disc, which also contains demos of Mega Man 8 and Mega Man Battle and Chase. So let us begin, but before we truly begin, I do gaming content like this all the time, so if that's your type of thing, please consider subscribing for the channel. It's free and you can always change your mind later on anyways. Starting off with gameplay differences. The all-around difference between the prototypes and the final game. Start screen, you got all these Japanese text over here. The start screen, when this version is loaded, it cautions because this software is still in development. Even if there are bugs or other problems with this version, we unfortunately cannot do anything about it. And here's what it looks like. Our main menu. A main menu of this work in progress build, it plays music from Mega Man or Rockman Battle and Chase, which is the racing game of Mega Man. At the time of recording this video, I still have yet to play that game actually. I'll play it eventually, it's only a matter of time. It contains a detailed explanation for the default key mapping of the three games. The promotion art of Rockman 8 and Rockman Battle and Chase was finished at this point, but the Rockman X part was barely started and used a picture of Zero as a placeholder. If the game idles for about 5 to 10 minutes, it will also jump back to this game screen, select screen, the most demo trial version of games. If the game keeps idling at the Rockman X4 demonstration screen, it will advance to the Rockman 8 part of it, followed by the Rockman Battle and Chase demonstration. Alright, here's what that looks like. Using Zero's background from X4, with a PS1 controller as well. Alright, we have the background of Mega Man 8 over here, which once again, as I stated in the previous part, Mega Man 8 and X4 were both developed at the same time. And Mega Man Battle and Chase, which I believe was also developed during this time as well. It seems. Alright, Maverick Hunter HQ. More details are present in the final version. Chairs are green instead of purple, as you can see over here. And they look a little less blurry in the final game as well. And the light at the center of the Hunter HQ is green instead of yellow. Here's a closer look. And Zero's just standing there looking at something. I know Iris is supposed to be there in the final game, but she hasn't been implemented yet. Perhaps they haven't finalized her design yet or something, who knows. The now making symbol is a placeholder for inaccessible stages. While the inaccessible stages that, like bosses, are given a strange Black Maverick portrait. X has an angrier pose in the final because of the implementation of background story. Yeah, he really wants to destroy the Mavericks, bring peace to the land once again. Here's what that looks like, and once again with the now making text and the soul rust from before. You can tell some of the Mavericks portraits are at least done like Web Spider and Frost Walrus over here. But here's what it looks like in the final game. Alright, intro stage. The stage is known as Air City instead of Sky Lagoon. Sky Lagoon's a better name. You can see the text for Air City right there. I like how it says X is rushing to it, showing he's making haste to stop the Mavericks. Anyways, due to altered enemy locations, it's not possible to jump over enemies and open the door without taking damage in the prototype. And they had to change that here because that's a little Timmy design. You shouldn't have to damage boost to get through an obstacle. Damage boosting should be a choice, not a necessity. Due to no story element existing here in the prototype, the player can walk around for a while before leaving the screen. Alright, here's what that looks like. And we got Magma Dragoon sitting over here. Alright, one more extra life in the prototype version, and the player can collect 2 extra lives, and then die in the Crusher repeatedly to reach the maximum extra lives, unlike in the final game. Alright, here's what that looks like. One thing that some Mega Man games tend to do is have respawnable lives, which is honestly really bad. If you get a life, you end up dying, and respawns again, that essentially gives the player infinite tries, which, in my opinion, you should only be able to pick up the life once per attempt at a stage. So say you lose your 3 lives and you reset, that's when a life should respawn. It shouldn't respawn like each time you die, you know? You can just try it infinite times. But again, that's something I'll bring up in later playthroughs. Which I'm glad that the devs decided to change here. Alright, the location of a life refill item has been moved a bit in the final version. Alright, here's what that looks like. Perhaps to kind of entice the player to take a risk if they want to get the health pickup and then climb out of there instead of them just being able to easily get both of them. If they're fast enough, they can get it. Alright, when Zero dies, his bubble color is the same as X's blue, likely as a placeholder. In the final version, the bubbles have been changed to yellow, more like an orange color, but whatever. Notice how X's symbol is used here as well, a mix of X and Zero's symbol. Well, it's used in the final version too, so never mind what I just said. I do like that though, you got an X in the middle and a zero around it. Alright, only aiming laser and soul body are available by default. The boss is immune to aiming laser, but soul body works. Here's what that looks like. Irigion, for those of you who might not remember his name. And notice how soul body is also a different color compared to the final game. It's green and orange instead of yellow and orange. Alright, there's an enemy which isn't present in the final version. Alright. I don't know, I'm not entirely sure what it's talking about here. I don't see an unused enemy. This enemy is used in game. Here's what it looks like in the oh, wait a minute. Unused location of that Poseidon-looking enemy. This enemy is used in stage, but the placement over here isn't in the final game is what it means. There's a golden variant of the Blast Raster enemy placed at various points of the level, not found anywhere in the final game. This one right over here, it seems to be talking about. It is immune to all attacks, though hitting it does pause its movement for a bit. It's likely an enemy that was meant to be avoided or something, instead of destroyed. And races along the wall at high speeds, perhaps because its movement is extremely annoying to deal with. This was removed and in most cases replaced by the Metal Gavial, enemy that can be destroyed by X's Ground Hunter and Zero's Ringingeki attack in the final game. Alright, here's what that looks like. I guess it being gold color means that it's indestructible or something. Oh, whatever. Kind of reminds me of the metal slimes in the Dragon Quest games. Alright, the cave housing the armor capsule has not been implemented yet. Likely because it hasn't been made yet. Simple solution, or explanation. There are some sections of trees that can be destroyed by fire attacks in the final. In the prototype, the tree has no hitbox and hit flashes. Well, because it being implemented to be destroyed by the fire weapon, Rising Fire, or Reunion, hasn't been implemented in yet either. Our web spider is largely the same, but has an important difference. He can shoot 2 electric webs at once, but the webs don't trap the player or home onto the player's position like they do in the final version, likely because that hadn't been coded in yet, or the devs just never came up with that idea just yet. Alright, once again, the player can move freely for a moment after beating the boss in the prototype. Here's what that looks like instead of it completely freezing the player's movements, like it does in the final game. Oh yeah, Zero with his thumbs up pose. Alright, next up, Magma Dragoon stage. The Giga Death enemy has received heavy sprite changes. Additionally, the entire stage is devoid of the lava bursts that come out of the ground. Here's what that looks like. And once again, likely because this effect hadn't been made yet. Alright, the right armor enemies have not been implemented yet. The stage graphic receives some changes, as well as a slightly different palette. Here's what that looks like. Yeah, the background looks a bit darker as well. I kind of like this more than the final game. Or more than the background in the final game. Alright, the right armor location has been changed in the final. Right here in the prototype, right behind this guy over here. And it's not there in the final game. The blocks that can be destroyed by X's charged Twin Slashers and Zero Shapuga attack in the final are missing. Likely because they haven't been implemented yet. Get used to me saying that a bit more. The armor capsule they would be guarding is also missing. Once again, not implemented yet. And even if they did make these blocks, it's likely they didn't put in the weakness table of it being destroyed by charged Twin Slashers or Shapuga yet. But anyways, the blocks on the lower path to the would-be boss area cannot be destroyed. Likely because, well, the coding for them to take damage from the right armor hadn't been made yet, forcing the player to take the top route. Additionally, the Giga Death enemy has been replaced by a ride armor enemy in the final. Alright, here's what that looks like. And I guess these guys are called Gigadus. Learned something new every day. I didn't know that. The Baton, Bone, and Metzar enemies have been replaced with lava bursts in the final. Alright, here's what that looks like. Alright, Jet Stingray stage. The flying enemies have been changed. Besides some graphical edits in the prototypes, they are green and purple, while in the final version, they are a light green and orange. Alright, here we go. We got a green biker dude looking guy over here. Alright, the hard tank location in the prototypes may not have been decided yet in Frost Walrus's stage. You can tell where the area where that would have been normally in the final game has been blocked off. As stated, likely they decided to put that later on. That's why they made a little crevice hole right there and destroyable block you can use the fire weapons on. Alright, the under the upper path at the beginning of the stage, there is a secret area a dash jump distance away that is not found in the final. It consists of long pathway filled with enemies that lead to an extra life sitting at the dead end. Alright, here's what that looks like. There is an area not found in the final that is blocked off by a chunk of ice not dissimilar to the one blocking the hard tank in the final. Despite this, like the trees in the Web Spider stage, the block does not have a hitbox and cannot be destroyed. Alright, here's this. Likely because the coding has not been implemented yet for the fire weapon. Rising fire, etc. You know what I mean. Alright, the EX item location may not yet have been decided. Notice the slightly darker palette of the background. Alright, so that looks like a notice how that's also blocked off as well. Probably thought they weren't going to put something there initially. And notice how the background's lighter in the final game than it is in the prototype, where it's much darker. Do prefer the lighter look. Some background changes, we're done. As I said before, darker in the prototype, and lighter in the final game. Game over and commercial screen. Game over. Thank you for playing. Thank you for making such a wonderful game, I must say. When you lose all your lives, the game over screen fades out. After that, the screen changes to an advertisement for the final game. After showing this, the game resets. Here's a closer look at some text. Alright, Japanese text with Zero saying this. Now printing. Alright, thank you for playing. However, that wasn't the true extent of my power. Alright, Zero. Check out Rockman X4 to see what my real power is like. I mean, since the first game where Zero was fully playable in, so... He is a very strong, Reploid. Well, technically he's not a Reploid, but very strong robot, let's just say. Alright, and Duo for Mega Man 8 over here. As it stated earlier, some demo stuff, or prototype stuff from both Mega Man 8 and Mega Man Battle Chase. All three games being developed simultaneously at the time. Back in 1996. I thank you for playing. You'll have to buy Rockman 8 if you want to know my true identity. I'll be waiting. Oh, speaking of Duo, when I eventually get to the Mega Man 8 playthrough and the Mega Man Power Fighters playthrough, ooh, I got a lot to say about this guy. Don't you worry. And finally, Roll. Thank you for playing. There are many other courses you can play in Battle and Chase. You simply must buy it. That's adorable. Definitely will play it at some point, Roll, don't you worry. But anyways, with that out of the way, next up, similar screens appear in sample versions of Rockman 8 and Rockman Battle and Chase, present on the same disc, and shown when you're about to quit the respective games. Duo wants the player to buy the final Rockman 8 game and discover his secrets, and Roll says that there are other courses in the final Rockman Battle and Chase game. Alright, unused graphics / changed graphics. Weapon get in title screen. Alright, the title screen has the word sample written on it, but otherwise appears to be similar to the final game. Also, the preceding animation is bare bones, containing only the logo animation present in the final version, similar to the US version, likely because the rest of the animation hadn't been made yet, but here's what it looks like. With the title card of Rockman X4 instead of Mega Man X4. Alright, in this build, the weapon get screens do not exist, and the game is programmed to go back to the stage select after completing a stage or defeating one of the two available Mavericks. Also, these graphics are not used in the title sequence due to obvious reasons, but both use 16 color palette here, and both are rough sketches. Alright, here's what that looks like. They kind of look terrible, not gonna lie, but they're rough sketches for a reason. Also, Zero Saber, I guess, is a bit white here for whatever reason. Also, goddamn, what happened to your leg X? Alright, but here's what they look like. The final version, much clearer looking. Alright, stage select. X himself has all of the story poses he uses in the final, though his shading was tweaked to be a little more consistent. An error with one pose was also corrected. Alright, here's what that looks like. He definitely looks a bit darker in the prototype. In the final game, he's not grimacing nearly as hard, let's say. And his costume is much lighter. Zero is more or less the same state as X, with the exception of his action pose here, which was quite up to snuff with the rest of his sprites. Otherwise, shading, tweaking were done for the rest of his sprites. Yeah, definitely some tweaking. He looks a bit more pixelated than usual here. Alright, in the stage select graphics, Double is only side character present in X and Zero's particular graphics files, likely because Iris had not been made yet, and her sprites hadn't been created yet. Iris does not appear to exist at this point. At any rate, most of Double's changes were touched up between now and the final. Iris probably hadn't been made yet because they hadn't made a perfect design yet. I'll just put that in there. Although, in particular, there was no longer a part of Zero's story by the time the final rolled around. Alright, here's what that looks like. Alright, although the Rebel Force stages do not exist in this build, Colonel has a placeholder portrait. His design may not have been decided upon this point in development, same with Iris's. And you know the story between Colonel and Iris. If you want to know more about that, just watch my Mega Man X4 playthrough and Zero's playthrough. But anyways, although Rebel Force has a concept already had, whatever. The placeholder portrait depicts Colonel Zoll from the television series Kamen Rider, which is kind of funny, but here's what that looks like. Funny how they use that as a placeholder. Makes me wonder how they had the licensing rights for that, at least for the prototype. And then here's the portrait we see in the final game. Alright, by using Game Shark code, this code here, replacing double X's with 08 and 09 or OA, you can view placeholder portraits of the space port and the two final weapon stages, respectively. And here's what that looks like. Alright, unused ability icons. When playing as Zero, this set of ability icons from the HUD are loaded into RAM, despite the fact that they are only loaded when playing as Zero. The fact that a lot of them don't seem to represent Zero's abilities. An early trailer shows the two stick figures, one being used for X's Soul's body, suggests that these are early icons for X's sub-weapons and not necessarily meant for Zero. Here's what that looks like. You can kind of tell, too. You got, I think it's supposed to be Double Cyclone. I think that's Frost Tower. It's hard to tell, honestly. That's Twin Slashers. That's Lightning Web. You can tell that, too, with the Soul Body, with the two stick figures. I think that's Aiming Laser. That's Ground Hunter. And this is probably Frost Tower. Well, this one over here... I'm blanking on that a little bit, not gonna lie. It's one weapon I'm completely forgetting about. I'll probably remember it later on. Let's not halt this any further. Let's look at this here trailer for a second. Notice how the quality seems a little bit underwhelming, let's just say. Definitely some shading issues that are a bit different compared to the final. The logo even looks a little bit different, I'd argue. And here it's Soul Body has the different coloration of yellow and orange instead of green and orange, like we see in previous pictures. As well as shows of Mega Man 8 and Battle and Chase. Let's skip ahead a little bit, just save a bit of time. Bro just one-shotted him, likely just as a test. See how his death animation would work. Notice how Zero's saber there was orange. Let's go back for a sec. Hold on. I saw that. Yeah, his saber's orange there. That's not in the final game. Alright, that golden enemy was there again. This cutscene I don't think we see in the final game. Well, we do see it at the beginning of the game, but it's a little different. Alright, I think that's the end of that. Alright, well, that being said, you can also find that in the Legacy Collection version as it's set in the bottom of the screen. But anyways, in-game, the 4th armor. Using Game Shark code, this code here, to give yourself all of the armor pieces reveals that it's a bit of an unfinished state. You can kind of tell, too, some elements of it are missing. While they seem to attach to X correctly at first, many animations can cause parts of them to disappear or become a jumbled mess. Additionally, changing weapons does not change the palette of the armor, which can cause some issues when firing. Alright, here's what that looks like. Some of the details on his armor are missing here. It just looks kind of plain without him. Here's what it looks like. The 4th armor that we all know and live. Not as much as the Ultimate armor, though. The leg parts do give X an air dash, but do not grant him the ability to hover in midair. Additionally, the head and body parts do not appear to have any of their effects implemented in yet, including no Nova Strike. Due to there being 2 different arm parts, the above code will only give the ability to change sub-weapons. Using Game Shark code, this code here, replacing XX with O1 from the stock shot arm parts, or O2 from the plasma shot arm parts. And here's what that looks like. Notice how his color scheme, while trying to use charged Soul Body, is glitching out over here. And once again, his color scheme over here is the unused orange and green one instead of orange and yellow. Alright, the stock arm part actually appears to be mostly finalized, with the only difference being the lack of graphics showing how many shots you have stocked. Alright, here's what that looks like. I guess the part showing how many shots you have just hadn't been implemented in yet. So had that never been the case, the player would have to keep track of that themselves, which I don't think is that hard to do. As long as you can count down from 4, who cares, right? But it's nice that they showed a way to, for players to more easily keep track of it. Alright, the plasma arm parts, on the other hand, are very unfinished, with them not having any colors at all, while having no sub-weapons equipped. Here's what that looks like. And that was supposed to be for the plasma shot. It's completely black here instead of the color scheme we get in the final game. Again, likely because it hadn't been implemented in yet. As stated here. Our weapon, equipping a sub-weapon gives them color and reveals that although the gloves are still blue, they do have black cuffs like the final game. The charged shot shoots a broken, almost invisible graphic forward, and doesn't leave a ball of plasma behind, although it deals 18 damage to normal enemies, as opposed to final 16. It only does 1 damage to bosses. Here's what that looks like. Yeah, notice how his gloves are blue here instead of red like in the final game. And it's a lighter shade of black. Alright, and I think the yellow on the cuffs is a little lighter than in the final game as well, though it's a little unnoticeable. Alright, sub-weapons. By default, this demo only gives you access to Soul Body and Aiming Laser. Using Game Shark code, this code here, will unlock all 8 weapons, and the above armor code will allow you to charge them. With the exception of Soul Body, none of the charged versions deal any damage towards any enemies, likely because their damage tables hadn't been implemented in yet. Inversely, all enemies that have immunities to certain sub-weapons in the final can be damaged with them in this version. Again, the weakness table hadn't been put in yet, or the damaging tables hadn't been put in yet. With the exception of the mid-boss Izard, who is already immune to Frost Tower. Alright, Lightning Web. Lightning Web behaves mostly identically, but doesn't shoot as far. The Giga Death and Ice Wing enemies are not weak to it as they are in the final. Here's what that looks like. And notice how the coloration for Lightning Web over here is a bit of a darker yellow color than it is in the final game where it's much lighter. Alright, same for the charged version. Here's what that looks like. And notice how it's a bit closer to X than in the final game, where it's a bit farther from him. Like another X amount of distance away from him, if you will, if that makes any sense. Alright, and the color scheme is here in the final version, which hadn't been implemented in the prototype. Alright, Frost Tower. Very unfinished, and exhibits behavior likely unintentional. When fired, it shoots a jumbled mess of pixels from where you last shot it ended. Most easily seen when using the shorter range attack like Lightning Web or Soul Body beforehand. The shot that comes out does actually do damage, but you can only fire one and won't it allow you to switch between afterwards. The charged version behaves similarly, but shoots a regular buster shot that enemies are immune to instead. Alright, here's what that looks like. Notice how when he's using well, I think he's trying to use Soul Body? Not really, but he's clearly got Frost Tower equipped. And you got this jumbled mess over here. Alright, Soul Body, one of the only two unlocked by default, and appears to be the most finished, as it has been, and its charged version function identical to the final, with the only difference being X's palette. It's only charged sub-weapon that can actually damage in this version. So a charged weapon that can actually do damage. But yeah, notice how, once again, in the prototype version, he's got a green and orange color scheme, while in the final, he's got this yellow and orange one, which personally I prefer the green and orange one, but whatever. Rising Fire. It seems to have a different color scheme as well, and the animation's a bit different too. Functions identical to the final, but X uses a different palette and uses and reuses his victory animation, likely as a placeholder, instead of having a unique one. Izard is weak to it, as is Frost Wars, although he doesn't go into a special animation for it, likely because that animation hasn't been made yet. The E-At, that's such a dumb name, but whatever. Ice Wing, as I called during my playthrough, Articuno, and Mega Nest enemies are not weak to it, as they are in the final. The charged version is completely non-functional and just has X sticking out his buster until you interrupt it with something else. Alright, here's what that looks like. This color scheme is a lot similar to Firestorm's color scheme or Waveburner's color scheme for Mega Man in the classic series for Mega Man 1 and Mega Man Base respectively. Or Magma Bazooka and Mega Man 9. You get it. Yellow and like an orange red over here. And yeah, like I said, they reuse his victory animation here. Notice how his mouth is open. He doesn't seem all that serious about it either. While in the final game, his arm is positioned a bit differently. His face looks a bit different as well, and it makes more sense for the animation of Rising Fire, and his color scheme is more of a silverish white color, a silverish white and red color instead of what we saw before with this. A color often used for fire weapons in the Mega Man series, specifically again in the classic series, as I mentioned before. Alright, Ground Hunter. I'm very unfinished with it only shooting a single buster shot that does 4 damage, because the main projectile itself hadn't been made yet. And like with Frost Tower, you can only shoot it once and cannot switch weapons afterwards. The charged shot is the same, but while it doesn't affect enemies like the other charged sub-weapons, it bounces off of enemies instead of continuing forward. Likely because that property for the weapon hadn't been made yet. And since it doesn't allow you to change weapons, that weapon changing coding hadn't been implemented yet clearly. But anyways, here's what it looks like, and the color scheme's a little darker than in the final, as you can see over here. Alright, aiming laser. Completely identical exceptions of the charged version, not hurting enemies, likely because the damage tables for the code hadn't been made yet. At least for the charged version. Alright, double cyclone. Mostly the same, just missing sound effects and has a slightly longer startup, likely because the sound effects hadn't been made yet. And is also an example of the armor's lack of palette change causing issues, as you can see here. Which is what that looks like. Has the same color scheme as in the final game. Alright, and the charged version being glitched since the armor coloration hadn't been coded in yet. Alright, finally, Twin Slashers. X uses a very different palette and shoots what looks to be a regular buster shot. Yeah, it's totally anything else but a regular buster shot. But actually appears to be 2 overlapped on top of each other. Like, I guess that's how the hitboxes would have worked during that prototype. Like Frost Tower and Ground Hunter, you cannot switch weapons after using it, but you can continue to fire afterwards. Despite its unfinished appearance, Web Spider is weak to it because the weapon table The weakness table for that weapon on Web Spider specifically had been made at that time, but you cannot cut his web with it, likely because it hadn't been implemented yet. Say with me, everyone. Like you can in the final. The charged shot looks the same, but doesn't allow you to shoot afterward. Alright, but here's what it looks like, and once again, the color scheme is very different, being a green and blue color, very reminiscent to Acid Burst and X3. And then in the final game, we have this gray and yellow color scheme, very similar to Thunderwall's color scheme in Mega Man 10, or Thunderbeam's color scheme in Mega Man 1. Or even Topspin's color scheme in Mega Man 3. Similar to those. Alright, Zero. The Zero sprites are in the middle of some all-out improvements, in this build. Some sprites are identical to the final, while others are a bit rough around the edges. Although palettes for Zero's other techniques are present. The only ones that function in-game are the Raijin Geki, I can normally say that better, Kyenbu, and Heian Kyaku. The Raijin Geki lacks the electrical effect of a saber, and when using it, Zero uses the voice clip that he uses when using Rikoha in the final game. Alright, here's what that looks like. Mostly the same to the final with this little running animation here. Alright, you notice how the saber slash does look a little different than it does in the final game. You can kind of still see the bit of a saber over here, which I'm glad they covered up in the final game. Just makes it look a bit cleaner. And his color scheme is also a bit lighter here than it is in the prototype build. His hair, I think, has... Actually, no, his hair looks the same. I was about to say that's slightly different shading, but that's clearly untrue. While disabled for this version, using Game Shark Code this code here will force it open. While the background itself is identical, all of the other graphics use the wrong palette. Additionally, the only thing you can do on this menu is unpause. By using the above Game Shark code for all sub-weapons and armor, you can fill out the menu to better compare it to the final version. But here's what that looks like. I notice how a lot of the color, especially for X over here, has been grayed out. And some of the weapons aren't even here despite their weapon bars being here. Again, most likely just hadn't been fully implemented yet. And they put some of those things there as like tests to see how it would look. It looks terrible. Spoiler alert, as you can see. Alright, differences include, while all of X's icons are in the same place as the finals, many of their names are in different places. Alright, Zero, on the other hand, not only has some of his icons and names in different areas, often with them not even matching together, he also has two different icons altogether. Zero's menu still has all of the ammo meters from X's menu, whereas the final only has it for Rikoha. The button for using Rikoha is referred to as SS instead of G. When using the code for all sub-weapons, there are a bunch of X's at the bottoms of Zero's weapon menu, likely because that hadn't been changed yet. The health bar health meter always shows as empty and is at its max length despite only being the default in-game. The sub-tanks are shown as full despite not having any. The boxes around the icons are not present. The life counter is more centered. In addition to abilities, the menu does track your current lives and weapon energy. However, the meters that drain when using weapons are often very different from where their icons or name is. For example, using Soul Body will drain the meter that has Frost Tower's icon and Ground Hunter's name. Despite using the wrong palette for much of the pause screen, the palettes for these graphics do exist, as you can see above. Alright, let's take a look at these pictures. Here's this one from the prototype. Final Game for X's background, at least in the Japanese version. Alright, here's Zero's prototype. Especially Zero looking a bit grayed out over here, looking a bit monochrome. Here's what it looks like in the final version. I like how in the Japanese version it even tells you how to activate the specific button codes to use different weapons. That's pretty cool. You don't see that in the English version. Or in any other version, for that matter. Alright, both X and Zero's portraits are slightly different with darker shading over their eyes, and their pupils are looking higher up. As you can see here with X. Must be something on the ceiling that he's looking at. Wonder what that is. He's looking more forward in the final version. Alright, Zero must be looking at something upward as well. Wonder what he's seeing. Not the question of the day, but be funny if somebody would answer what he might be looking at in the comments. Wrong answers only. Like we even know what the right answer is, but whatever. Both Ryujin and Shippuden use different icons. Alright, here's what that looks like. This one looks more like a fire tornado of some sort. It would be cool if instead of it being an upward slash, it was like a fire tornado that surrounded Zero. Kind of like how Thunderstorm works in Mega Man 11. Something like that. Alright. And here's what it looks like in the final. Here's Shippuden in the prototype, which makes me think it might have been like a forward thrust attack like one of his attacks from X8, instead of a dashing slash like in the final game, as you can see here with this crescent-shaped icon. Arakawa's icon is an interesting case. Despite the sprite being identical to the finals, no pouts give it the same color as the finals. Here it is given the pout of Gunbu's icon, which is what it shares in the final game. And here's what that looks like. It's a piss yellow color. Glad they changed that. That looks terrible. Alright, and then we got this bluish color in the final game. Alright, sound as music and sound. There are only 2 tracks that are present on the disc that go unused in this demo. That being Split Mushroom and Slash Boost stage theme, Cyber Peacock and Storm Owl's stage themes, along with any of the tracks from post-Maverick levels of the game and not present. Additionally, the title jingle, character select, dialogue music, and character-specific theme victory themes do not exist in this version. And the title screen, character select screen, and the warning events before bosses are all missing sounds. In general, all of the music tracks seem to be quieter than the ones used in the final release, even for the ones that are otherwise identical to the final version. Alright, starting with, I don't remember if I brought this up in my playthrough Ben at the time, of me making this video. It's been over 2 years since I did my X4 playthrough. But if I remember correctly, I do remember bringing up that Split Mushroom was one of the stages to have an unused theme, and I remember listening to this theme all the time back in high school too. Very nostalgic theme for me. But anyways, although the stage is inaccessible in this build, by way of a stage modifier, this track can be heard in-game. It is unfinished, lacking a lot of the instruments and being structured differently when compared to the final. Although this may have been intended to be similar to Frost Walrus' stage, where 2 different tracks of music are used for 2 different parts. Makes sense. There are other Mega Man games that do something like that. What, are there? Actually, no, never mind. No, there aren't. Never mind what I just said. But anyways, here's the prototype for Split Mushroom stage. Alright, and here's what the final version sounds like. Tell me which one you guys prefer. Honestly, I think I prefer the prototype of this. That's the end of that. Alright, Slash Beast also goes unused in this version, missing sections that the final version has at 51 seconds and a minute and 53 seconds, making it much shorter as a result. Alright, here's what that sounds like. Won't be able to listen to the whole thing, but here it is. Alright, here's the final version. Alright. An earlier form of the finals weapon get tune that has a slightly longer intro, although there it is used as the stage select music. The final stage select music isn't present. Excuse all the stuttering. Here's what it sounds like. Alright. Alright, Capcom voice. Found in both X's with this code here and zeros, this code here, final file data, just as voice says saying Capcom. I guess it's X and 0 saying that. It's really fast. Let's see that again. Alright, Power Fighter sound. The Mega Man arcade games that were made before Mega Man 8, Battle and Chase, and X4. Likewise, the above two sounds for the Mega Man arcade games are found in player files. In an early preview video, X and 0 borrowed placeholder voices from Rockman and Forte, or Mega Man and based the English name, the Japanese names for those games when they were originally only on the SNES before they were ported to the GBA. But anyways, these could be leftovers from a sound archive from the arcade titles. Alright, here's what that sounds like. And here's what that sounds like. Alright, others. This code over here, I'm not going to say all that. This file contains an 8x8 ASC2, or double 1, I guess, I don't know, or double L's, whatever. Character set and 3 palettes for the text. It reappears in the file data of Mega Man X5 and X6, and along with its colors, although it doesn't appear to be used there either. I mean, X5 and X6 do have the same art style or a very similar art style to X4, so it kind of makes sense. But here's what all this jumbled text looks like. Well, not jumbled text, you can see what some of the text says, but you get it. Kind of like this green one, though. And this red one. Alright, collision tiles. Similar to the ones in the Rockman 8 prototype, these tile sets have 4 colors and represent individual collision tile types. Like the contents of that code up there, font 8x8, though there is no known way to get them to appear in game. It is loaded into its own space in RAM, but is removed in the final. It returns in Mega Man X5 and is loaded into a different section of RAM in X6. Build date, text, present in X4.exe, add this code over here, and Capcom May 8th, 1997 at 14:16:53, or for those of you in America, or just anywhere in the world, let's be real, 2:16 p.m. and 53 seconds by Capcom. All that being said, there is one last section that I'd like to look at part 3, that being the rest of what we have over here. In part 3, we'll go over all that, and as well as pre-release information, we can do that first, which there isn't a lot over here. But anyways, that's what we'll handle with in part 3. So if you all enjoyed this addition to Unused Content and Games and you want to see more, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And considering some question today, as usual, what Unused Content did we go over today that you would have liked to see in the final game? I think for me, that solo body coloration, that was green and orange. This one right over here, I would have loved to see in the final game. That looks better than the orange and yellow one we got. But anyways, with that being said, thank you all for watching. See you in the final part of the X4 News videos, and have a berrific day.